my video will start recording. There we go. Okay, so today is ecology, and we're finishing up all of the basic content. And so my plan then is on Monday, you are going to take, if you did the mock, you're just going to get your mock. You're going to go over parts of it. You're going to, just kind of try to do, now that we've gone over everything, see if you can't feel a little more confident about the multiple choice, the ones you missed and all that stuff. I'll be here. I'll help you. We can work one-on-one. We can do, if there's a question everybody has, we can go over it, stuff like that. So Monday's kind of choose your own adventure review day, stuff like that. Yes.
If we aren't here Monday, can we do it Tuesday?
You can. I have a little wee plan on Tuesday. So, but hopefully it won't take the whole hour. On Tuesday, I'm planning on going through kind of the main labs, and then okay, bacterial transformation. What were you supposed to get out of that? Stuff like that. And also that'll be a time, if you want, that you can sort of organize maybe a small portfolio. We kind of started that in the beginning of the year, but labs were a hot mess this year between the hybrid and everything. So we may need to kind of reorganize. Some of you guys, especially if you're going to Oklahoma Christian University. Let's not send you to high school again. So if you're going to Oklahoma Christian University, I know they're requiring a lab portfolio in order to get credit for AP biology. There may be other universities that do the same. They basically want to have demonstration that you have done some lab skills before they'll give you credit for the lab portion of their class. And so we'll maybe have some time to kind of say, here's the labs we did. Here's what I think you should have gotten out of them. Here's what could be tested over them. Maybe a little bit of an experimental design kind of day on Tuesday. And then Wednesday, of course, I will be here. Natalie, that might be a great day for you to come in and just spend some time. If you don't have a test, no, because you're a sophomore. Then you may want to come in just on your own while I'm here and grab your doc and sit. I think, Anya did that this last Wednesday. Was that helpful?
Mm-hmm.
It was, and it's quiet and you can spend as much time as you want with it or whatever. And I'm here, you can ask me questions if you don't understand. So might be a good option too for anybody. If you want to come in on Wednesday, it'll be basically our kind of last Wednesday before our test. So if you want to spend that time in here tutoring and stuff, I know juniors are going to have English test if you have that class. So if that's not an option for you, unless you want to come after your English test and you just finished it and you want to pop in and, nothing like doing a little extra work right after you finish a 4-hour test or whatever, 3-hour test. And then on Thursday is my day to really hit the math. And I kind of hate that it's the day before the test, but shoot, it'll be fresh, I guess. But that is the day that I know nobody has an AP test because there aren't any on that day. And so I know that we'll all be at least available to be here if we want to be. And so I'm going to do the math quantitative analysis review, everything math, or the most important math anyway, that I feel like we might just need to solidify a little bit before we go into our test on Friday. Okay. So that's kind of the deal. And I don't anticipate any problems. I feel like you're maybe better reviewed than many other years as far as that goes. And so I anticipate us having just a really good testing year, as long as we can all take a deep breath and not stress ourselves out to the point or be burned out on AP testing so that we don't want to move our pencils anymore. Yeah.
So we don't choose an FRQ, we just do every one.
You do every single one. Yeah, this isn't a choose. Yeah, they have 6 and you do them all 6. Yeah, kind of like the mock was. Basically, it's like, here they are, do them. Oh no, of course, if you want to choose them, you can, but you're getting points for each of them. I would recommend doing them all. Okay, so I took ecology here and I based it, I kind of divided it into 4 main parts. And so I've got the energy part. Now remember, ecology is like the big picture, right? Remember, an ecosystem is all the abiotic and biotic factors in an area. They're in one area, they have the same kind of climate, kind of a needs for precipitation and temperature, and so they end up kind of in the same space, and they interact together. So there's some energy that moves through. They definitely respond to each other, these things, and to the abiotic factors. So there's some responses that go on. We do see growth in them, and we have to talk about that. And of course, there's roles and relationships in between all of this. So this is all about interactions. And so I divided my little sheet into 4 chunks, and we'll kind of we'll kind of hit each one. I'm going to start with energy. It's got the most standards attached to it in your curriculum. And if you will just keep this in mind as you answer any questions about really through the whole entire curriculum, it is all about conservation of energy, okay? All right, so we're all about conserving energy. So any life strategies, reproductive strategies, anything like that, if there's an energy attachment, you can just remember, biologically speaking, and with natural selection in mind, conservation of energy is a good thing. Like the more we conserve energy, the less we have to work to get more energy. And so it's like, so that maybe the path of least energy usage is going to be the one you can expect an organism to take in any scenario. Okay. Barring some other things, like if they have to compete for a female or something, they might have to put out some more energy into that. But of course, the payoff is good. So when you're talking about conservation of energy, you're going to talk about there'll be like reproductive strategies or food finding strategies or like hunting strategy. I guess that'd be food finding, but any kind of strategies, you're going to see it, the animal or the plant or the fungus or the whatever go towards using less energy. So that's what I mean by that. Everybody understand what that means? Okay. All right. So the first one we kind of see here is that we have two different types of, we'll start with animals, because I don't know that you could even apply this to plants. So we have endotherms and ectotherms. Do you guys know what these are? Anybody familiar?
I remember reading about that.
You have a different name for them.
Like lizards?
Yes, which one?
Endo?
Nope. Close. You have a different name for them. You call them warm-blooded and cold-blooded, right? Okay, so endo is like inside, like keeps yourself warm by inside stuff. Okay, so endotherms are like you can control your thermostat basically inside your body. So this is us, right? We can shiver, we can do all these things, and our body controls our own thermostat. It's kind of what that means. Ecto is like outside. So this thermostat, this therm, has to be controlled by outside forces. So these are your lizards, the ones that'll have to go lay on a rock or do something like that in order to keep warm. Okay, so the difference we'll see between these, and if you need to define those for yourself, please do so. These are your warm-blooded at the top. The endo, meaning they can keep themselves warm, and the ecto are your quote-unquote cold-blooded, though their blood is not cold. You understand this, right? They have to be within a normal range of temperature. They just are not going to. They're not going to just radiate heat into their environment because they don't do that. And so what we've got here is two different kind of strategies here. These guys use more heat, use more energy. So here we go again, talking about energy. Well, that's the little tab we're in. Use more energy, but the payoff, here comes the payoff. Actually, you can write but if you want. I'm going to run out of room. They use more energy, but they can inhabit they can inhabit a larger range. So they can inhabit, I'm going to say, I'm trying to fit this in here, larger range. Okay, why is that? Why is it a good strategy to use more energy in their case? What is it? What does this use more? Why is that a payoff? Yeah.
I'm thinking just on the level like reproduction, like if they have to use more energy, but they can like live longer in the environment.
They could possibly live longer, but what am I talking about here with this inhabiting larger range? Like, what does that mean? They can spread out more, right? Why? Because they can keep their bodies warm, so they can go north and they can go south, right? And so why is it good to be able to spread out more?
Resources.
Yeah, you can exploit resources that maybe other organisms can't, right? Because they are stuck having to stay in temperature ranges that are more mild, right? So if you think about it, our snakes, our lizards, our alligators, our frogs, our stuff, as you go further north, there comes a point where you have very few ectothermic species. You might have, I think there's a couple of frogs that have some crazy like antifreeze blood that can live up. They have developed another strategy to inhabit this. But remember yesterday, if you were here yesterday, remember yesterday when I said like extinctions open up, like you can have adaptive radiation and you can have all these niches filled. This is a different way besides extinction to fill a lot of niches, is becoming is using a strategy where you do have to use more energy. You have more of an energy investment, but because of that, your payoff is you have all these resources that aren't available to organisms like this that can't exploit those areas because they have to be in the sun, basically. Okay, so that's kind of their thing. Now, on the opposite then, the ectotherms conserve, but have a limited range. So they have more limited range, which comes with limited resources. Now, I mean, that being said, some of our ectothermic areas are some of our most diverse and explosive with different trees and plant, our rainforests are our best ectothermic areas, which is why you can get really, really large snakes and really, really large reptiles like crocodiles and things like that in those nice banded areas, because they can be more successful because they are ectotherms, right? So they have to get their body temperature has to be regulated by that warmth and everything. Well, you can see actually it's a pretty cool, if you did a study on the size of your reptilian populations and your amphibian populations, the more you get into that nice, like warm all year round pattern, the bigger they get, because they are able to be way more successful. And then, the more northern and southern you go, all of a sudden they're having to be smaller. Australia is a little bit of a problem because of its latitude. It's kind of way down south, but it hits a lot of sun. If you've ever, that even though it looks like it shouldn't, it is very, very, very hot in Australia. And so they've got some pretty massive critters there. Yep.
So are amphibians and reptiles the only?
Fish are as well. But then again, water temperature is typically pretty stable. So they do that. So basically birds and mammals are endotherms, right? And then anything below that are ectotherms. So they have to use then movement strategies like going into the sun and out of the sun. Now they can't get too hot either. So they'll have to move in and out of the sun. And so in the wintertime, you might see some of our snakes and stuff out on rocks and stuff like that. But in the summer, they're going to be buried under leaves because they have to do this, to keep their body temperature regulated. Otherwise, they can't do anything. And that's why they can't grow. They can't reproduce. They can't do anything if their body temperature gets out of whack. And so that's why they have to stay in ranges where their body temperature can be maintained, except for those weird little antifreeze frogs. Yeah, if you want to look up some funky things sometimes. There are some frogs that can actually freeze down to like nothing. Like their heart beats like once every 3 days or something. and then it warms up again. They come back to life. Weird. Okay. All right. So maybe you've seen this before. Here's a little pyramid here. They actually okay. This is not an AP biology like thing. Like we don't do this whole energy pyramid thing, but they talk about trophic levels and energy movement as if you just know it. Okay, so it's one of the things that they expected you picked up your freshman year or whatever your pre-AP biology education was. And so basically remember that these are called trophic levels. And I'm going to try to give you a root word here so that you can remember this stuff. Okay, and they, troph right here means feed. Autotroph, heterotroph, trophic level, right? So these are feeding levels. So if you see troph anywhere, think, okay, we're doing some sort of feeding, okay? But the thing about this little energy pyramid, this could be an energy pyramid, this could be a biomass pyramid, this could be a pyramid of numbers. So basically this is kind of how it works. They all kind of look like this. But, you have your producers in the bottom that are producing energy. You have primary consumers. I don't have to write them all because you can figure it out after that. You have your secondary. You can't fit all this in here. Anyway, I'm not going to write the rest. Tertiary would be the next one. And basically any decomposers or detritivores is what they're called because they eat dead stuff, or some of them. You have detritivores and decomposers, but this is all like freshman level stuff. Like it's not technically in your standards. It's just they kind of expect that you've had this background at some point. So they're not going to test you really difficultly, like hard questions on this stuff. But what they will do sometimes is put the words in the question and you're like, oh gosh, I don't remember what a trophic level is. So make sure that you and this one would be your tertiary. It's just like protein folding. So basically what happens here is energy moves up, right? So we're talking energy. and you have your cute little 10% rule. Do you remember the 10% rule? Some of my sophomores totally missed this unit. Yeah.
So is it primary consumers get 100% of the energy from producers?
They get 100% of their energy from producers, but only 10% of the producer's energy goes up.
Okay.
But they don't get their energy from anywhere else. Like they have to get it. They're herbivores,
So
right?
they get 10% of the energy that starts at the bottom.
Right. So if the producers make, so if I want to put numbers on this, so if the producers make like, I'm going to put it over here because I need that space. If the producers make say 17,000 kilocalories or joules or however they want to measure their energy, then this one would you just move your decimal once and it would be 1,700, and this one would be 170, and that would be 17. Okay, and that's how much is available to that. Because the rest of it is typically used for their cell processes. I mean, the producers aren't just producing energy to be benevolent and send it all up, right? They're producing energy, and by producing energy, I mean photosynthesis, right? They're producing energy to run their cellular processes, to make proteins, to do all that stuff, and so they're losing some as heat, because all of those little reactions create a little bit of heat. Even though we know our plants aren't just radiating body heat into the environment, they do lose a little bit of heat with every one of their little reactions. And so they're using the energy. Now, this is just ballparking, right? 10% rule is just a general average. It doesn't have to be straight at 10% every time. But basically, it's saying the producers are using like 90% or losing it to the environment. And then the 10% is all that they would have stored in their tissues. Like that's all they would store for the next, and then when they get eaten, the next level up would get about 10%. The rest of it's all been used up. Okay, so that kind of makes sense on the 10% rule, like where it's all going, because they're using most of it. Okay, so this is our little trophic levels, and this is a word that they pop in, trophic or trophic levels. They just expect you to know. You can find trophic, and you can see I probably have some little posters around. My freshman just did this. So you can find trophic levels also in a food web or a food chain, right? I could take my little critters, my little plants, and my herbivores and my carnivores, and I could put them on a food chain or a food web with arrows instead of putting them on this pyramid, right? And I would still call it a trophic level because it's a feeding level. Okay, cool with that? All right. And then two other things I think is all I have in energy. So first of all, if you increase in size, then decrease your metabolic rate. And you can vice versa. You can flip the arrows. So basically you have an inverse relationship here between size of the organism and metabolic rate. And this is just, once again, in general. Occasionally you'll have an exception to the rule. But like metabolic rate is like how fast everything moves as far as using energy inside your body. Okay. And so like how fast do you burn through all the calories that you eat? The faster you burn through them, the higher your metabolic rate is, or the higher your what we call metabolism is. Okay, so if you're like, oh, I have a high metabolism, then that means you probably eat a ton of food and you stay skinny, and people probably hate you, honestly. But then if you're, I'm sorry to break it to you, don't tell people that. If you are really like skinny and whatever, just be like, I just diet a lot. Because otherwise, you don't have a lot of friends. You don't brag about your high metabolism. And then if you go down, opposite, if your size is small, then your metabolic rate is higher, okay? And so we're talking like little teeny things like mice have a pretty high metabolic rate, or little bitty, and we'll just stick with mammals, but you could, all the way down. And then elephants, they burn their energy a little bit slower. Okay, probably a good thing, because I can't imagine how much they would have to eat if they had the metabolic rate of a mouse. Like they already eat tons of food a day, or I don't know, tons, that's probably an exaggeration. But I can't imagine how much they would have to eat if they burned through it faster than they do. Yeah.
Is this just between different types of organisms, or like kind of like a fat mouse or like a tiny mouse?
Well, I mean, you could say that there'd be a range, right? Obviously, if you have a fat mouse that's got a low metabolism, if you would, it's still within the mouse's metabolic rate. It's within the mouse's metabolism range. And so even a little fat mouse with slow metabolism is still going to have faster metabolism than an elephant, which has a textbook slow metabolism. Like elephants just.
Could have lower metabolic rate.
Yeah, no, this is typically within different species, and because there's still kind of an acceptable range for each species. If you get outside of that acceptable range, then you probably have some genetic thing, that makes it kind of different. Yeah.
Does age play a part of metabolism?
So we tend to think that age plays a part in metabolism in humans, and it does. When you're young and growing and everything like that, your body is going to burn through your calories a lot faster because you have a lot of stuff going on, right? You have a lot of cells dividing, you have a lot of things happening. As we don't have as many processes that we're doing in our cells, then we don't need as much energy, and we do slow down our energy requirements, but we're still within the range of humans, right? And so we still have a metabolic rate that's like comparable to each other, even when it's slower for some older people. And so, yes, speak from experience. Your metabolism will slow down every decade, it feels like, and you're all of a sudden can't eat like you used to and stay the size you were. Okay. All right. So that's kind of a rule of thumb. So if you see some questions about that, and they seem to be talking about energy and size, you can just assume that the larger the organism is, the slower they're going to process their energy. Okay, which is probably an evolutionary. There's probably some fitness involved in that, because even when you're large, you have to eat a lot. Like I said, with elephants, you have to eat a lot anyway to keep up all those cell processes. All those cells need nutrients, and so probably evolutionarily speaking, we talk in terms of fitness. It's probably best if you have a slower metabolistic, I keep saying it's stupid, a slower metabolism or metabolic rate, so that you don't have to just eat all day long. Okay, so as far as this, and the end of the picture is, or the bottom line is, if you have extra energy, and this will be the last thing I write, if you have, in this little box, if you have extra energy, then you will, let's see, how did I write it? Okay. Extra energy, I said question mark. You will store it and or grow. Okay, so that's what you're going to see if there's an excessive amount of energy. If you are lacking energy, like you aren't getting enough, then you will see organisms decrease in mass and die. Sad. Okay, so that's kind of the bottom line. Two options. Or I guess you might just have, third option might just be you have just what you need to do what you're doing, and you're not changing, you're just maintaining. Okay? So, and a lot of times, we're not really talking about, ecology isn't really talking about just like one organism. But you could say this for one organism, but it's also talking about like your whole community, your whole population, right? If your whole population has extra energy, then you can have extra energy stored in the little organisms. You could also have your whole community and your population growing, okay? Because if you have extra energy, then you can see more reproduction. It's just that's, now you will see a lack. So when you lack energy, decreasing in mass, you'll also see a decreasing in reproductive rates for anything that has low energy, okay? If you don't have enough to eat, reproduction gets tossed out the window. Because that's something that's not necessary to life. And so that's kind of a thing. And we do see this in humans as an example, is that if you don't have a high enough caloric intake, especially with females, you just don't have a cycle, and you don't go through puberty sometimes. So, sometimes gymnasts, we know that they start really early and they work really hard. And so they can't really maintain the caloric intake that they need to go through puberty. And so you'll see them very delayed. That's because reproduction will be the first thing that's stopped, because it's not necessary to life. The organism will preserve life first. And then when there's enough calories, then it'll go into reproduction. So when you talk about extra energy allowing it to grow, you can talk about this on an individual basis, like growing physically a whole body, or you can talk about it on your population size too. Because if the population has extra energy, it will reproduce more, because that will become available to individuals. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Good? Okay. Ecology is all like this, like super common sense, like super, yes, this is stuff we're familiar with. Yep.
So could that be part of the reason that like populations that don't have access to food resources like die off?
Yep, because they just, first of all, organisms start to die, and secondly, ones that are left aren't healthy enough to reproduce. Mm-hmm. Yes, so you'll lose your entire population that way. Okay, so let's talk about responses. There's a couple of categories here. Organisms can respond. So respond to the environment, that's one. So this is responses to environment. I am not listing everything that could be possible because I don't think I could. They don't give you like, this is a list of the environments that we're going to talk about, and they have to talk about the response to that. Basically, just know the general idea that absolutely organisms respond to their environment, right? I mean, if something is going on in the environment, that is one of the characteristics of life. Like organisms respond to the environment. Okay, so a couple of examples I have one example for sure is something called tropisms, and you might remember these. Tropisms, and these are for like plants for the most part, though you can see these in little organisms that maybe don't have a super like complex nervous system. So these are going to be things like phototropism. Example, where do I want to write this? I better check my thing and make sure I have space. I think I have space off to the right. Okay, so example, we're going to see like phototropism. So phototropism, gravitropism. You remember these? Yeah.
I remember them. I don't know what they are.
So it's like plant. I'm trying to figure. I'm just going to write gravity because I can't quite hyphenate that. And then the plant will turn up. So I don't think they'll do thigmo. Hydro. They might do hydro. What would that be a response to? Water. Response to water. So this is where your plant is going to. And we know this happens. Like I could demonstrate with my poor ugly pansies that are in the window over there. I just turned them yesterday because all of their flowers were pointing towards the sun and all the plant was. And so I turned it so that it would be kind of more straight, and kind of grow up instead of towards the window. It's just a response to light. Your root system of your plant is going to have a negative phototropism, right? It's not going to want to grow roots in the light. Your gravitropism is a response to gravity. And this is how seeds know which way to go. You plant a seed and it's like all of a sudden the green part comes up and the roots go down. What? How did it know to do that? There's no light underground, for it to react to because it has a response to gravity. And even like Anya was saying, you can turn a plant, on its side or upside down and it'll grow up, and you could try that in the dark and the plant would still grow up because your shoot system, your green part of your plant isn't just responding to light, it's also responding to gravity. Okay, so there's a response to environment for things that are not really nervous system heavy. The other response to the environment, of course, is just simply behaviors. And these will go for every category of responses we have because actually all of these things could kind of go with each, the behaviors, tropisms, everything. But behaviors are just simply a response to a stimuli. And we typically talk about behaviors in organisms that have some sort of nervous system that can kind of, like your nervous system is making a choice to respond or not. Where in tropisms, we talk more about things that are just like hormonally reacting to the environment without any sort of nervous system involved.
How do plants react to water?
To water, so there's some really cool studies on that one. So actually, they say the root systems, or actually not even they say, the root systems have an attraction to water. And it's interesting because even they have started finding that even in steel pipes where the water is not there, they will have problems with roots wrapping around them because they're attracted to the water inside the steel pipe. And they can't quite figure out how that chemical is getting through that steel pipe. Like it literally is, but it must be a pretty strong attractant. And I don't have all the details on the actual like hormonal aspect or chemistry of it, but some of the studies that have come out, and that's probably been a decade ago, that they started figuring out that even through steel, plant roots are sensitive to water. And so it's pretty crazy. But if you think about it, that is a very biological, that's a strong selective force for roots to find water because that's kind of the whole life of the plant. And so their roots, it would be the root part. The shoot part doesn't respond to water at all. So it's just the roots. By the way, plants just have two organ systems, the root system and the shoot system. So
what about like succulents?
Succulents? So succulents, I imagine their roots are also attracted to water, but what they do is just store water in their tissues at a much higher amount of water than other plants do. But that would just be once the roots pull the water in, then after that it's just, transpiration takes over and the movement of water through the plant takes over. So, but yeah, they have to store them quite a lot. Okay, so this one is when it gets a little bit crazy because there's a lot going on responding to other organisms. So these are our two responses. This one is the one that you'll see more, in my opinion, you'll see more than response to the environment, though they'll bring this one in somewhat sometimes. But this one, they'll have a lot, because, I mean, this is like, we can talk with this with reproductive behaviors, you know, then we can talk about evolution with that. So they can wrap response to organisms in a lot of different parts of our curriculum. So you'll see this pop up quite a bit. And so, I mean, I have on here, communication is a big one. So we'll talk about that. There are other responses, of course, but communication is one that they have a lot of examples for, whatever. And so just how do they communicate is one thing. So how do we communicate? Would be with well, you could have audible, you know, I mean, I'm sitting here talking to you, so that's audible. We could have audible, we could have chemical, and that's in the form of like pheromones or hormone release.
Is that like feedback?
Chemical?
Yeah.
Like feedback systems?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, like we talked about the ethylene feedback, plant ripening kind of thing. This would definitely be a chemical communication between plants. In fact, plants communicate quite a bit chemically. Like they release a chemical into the air and then other plants will respond accordingly. Kind of crazy. So chemicals would be hormones or pheromones, which for the life of me, I can't spell. I know, I'm going to try to write pheromones and it's going to come out. Who knows what it's going to say. But it starts with a PH if you want to attempt. So pheromones, hormones, things that are released in the environment. We know that in terms of sexual communication between some organisms, even some animals will release pheromones. Like I think ferrets do and have a really weird smell. The little sugar gliders, they have just a funky, musty odor that we can smell. It's definitely not something that would be attractive to us, but it seems to attract other species. That's just a release of a hormone. Now we release pheromones too. Pheromones are kind of a weird thing because typically they don't actually make a smell. So it's like you're picking it up like a smell, like it's like through your olfactory system, you're picking up the pheromone and it's activating your brain as if you smelled something, like if you smell something that you like cooking and it's like, woo, yay, pleasure center goes off and you get all this release of hormones. That's like, let's eat some brownies or whatever it is. Pheromones do the same thing. You just don't physically smell it. Like there's no smell there. And so this is one of our chemical attractants to other people because people will release a different pheromone signature depending on really a lot of different things. And so some way you may be attracted. I know it just takes the romance out of it, doesn't it? Some way you may be attracted to other people just because of what pheromone they release into the air. And so that's a chemical communication between you that you don't even really know is happening. But they have done a lot of studies with that too. There's some interesting studies with this stuff. As far as just having different clothing items from your spouse or your significant other, and you can then they try to have people identify which one is theirs, is the clothing from their. It's interesting stuff. But anyway, and then there's a lot of other ones. You can just have like some behavioral, so visual kind of communication. This is bird dances and what we call nonverbal communication for humans, right? Totally a thing. Like, if somebody's giving you the stank eye in the car next door, even if they're not yelling at you, right? Or flying a bird to you. And then, so there's a lot of them. You could go on and on that list. And then basically, like, what are we, like, I'm going to say why. Like, why communicate? Why communicate? There's a lot of reasons why you need to communicate. I made a little list here. Dominance, territory, reproduction, foraging, all these things. So dominance, and you can put whatever you want. Foraging, so looking for food. Bees are a great example of a foraging communicator. They dance. Oh my gosh, bees dances are the coolest thing ever. If you haven't ever watched a video of bees dancing, they dance out where the flowers are. So 3 circles means the sun is that way, and then 1 line means and they have interpreted it. Beekeeper people that have studied bees, entomologists, have pretty much interpreted the communication of the bees. Because the little worker bees come back to the hive and they found a really awesome clover patch, and they got to tell the other bees where it is, and they just do this little circle, this little stomping around, and it's like this really adorable little dance that they do, and it's like telling them where the foraging is, and then they're like, go little bees, and then all the little bees fly off to the clover patch. Like they know exactly where it is because they give them directions. Cutest thing ever. Most adorable, the dancing bees. Yeah, and they're not the only ones. They're not the only ones that do something like that, but the bees are just amazing that way. Let's see what else. Reproduction, of course, we know reproduction is huge as far as communication. And then I also have like territorial, of course, marking territories. Anybody ever had a cat they forgot to fix in time and it just started spraying stuff? And you're like, dadgummit, cat, what are you doing? What it was doing is chemically communicating to other cats that this be mine and you better step aside, kind of thing. And our wild cats do it. Our wild cats do it very, very well. If you ever go walking out in the forest and you see a little scratch marks on a tree and you see a little wet spot and some little funny smells, I probably would just kind of find a different place to be because you have just stepped into a big cat's territory. And while they may not see you as a threat and it may not be a problem, other cats definitely get the message. It's marking their territory. It's like saying this is, and so it's a chemical and a visual, because they'll have scratch marks on it too. Chemical and visual communication that, and I didn't write territory on there, but that's another one. Chemical and visual communication that this is my territory, okay? Some of these behaviors are innate and some are learned. And one big thing that can go in here, especially with innate, but I'm going to argue that learned can do the same. We have a positive selective pressure on, or negative actually, but typically a positive selective pressure on innate behaviors. If a behavior makes an organism survive and reproduce better, then that behavior will be passed on in future generations. And the reason I say mostly innate is because that's in your DNA. So it just gets passed on, right? So these are in your DNA. And learned, you're picking up either from experiences that you've had. So maybe we don't have an organism that is like, maybe the organism isn't like taught, like sea turtles or whatever. They don't get taught stuff by their parents. They're just dumped and have a good life kid. And so there's a lot of organisms like that. Like they're by far, probably most organisms don't have parental care. So sometimes learned is just by experience, if something goes right, great. And then they'll have a selective pressure there, but it won't be passed on, right? It won't be passed on because it's not in the DNA. And if you're not having parental care, you can't teach anybody. But there are some learned behaviors that are taught within a parental care system that extremely increase survival. One of my favorite ones right now is like, I don't even know what generation we're on, 5th, 6th generation orcas over by, and they're down kind of by Australia way, and they breach up and get sea lions. You may have seen this, I don't know. They get up on the beach and grab a sea lion and then wriggle back into the water. That is like super risky behavior because if they get stuck on the beach, they can't breathe. Because in case you didn't know, marine mammals, their body weight, they don't have a skeletal structure to support all that weight outside of the water because it's not buoyant, in the air. And so they start collapsing on themselves, like their lungs can't. And so for super risky behavior, but very, very successful, right? So these orcas, these killer whales, up on the beach, grab a sea lion, wriggle back in, and then that's a really successful hunting strategy. They have taught the other orcas that for 5, 6 generations now. Other pods of orcas don't do it. They're the only pod. One pod of orcas does this. This is a learned behavior that's increasing. It's got a selective pressure. And when they teach each other that, they are having more reproductive success. So their fitness is greater. So there are some learned behaviors that you could argue have a positive selective pressure as long as they're able to teach the next generation. Okay, cool stuff there. And finally, for here, if you have cooperation, I drew my little stick people holding hands. So cooperation usually increases fitness. Happy face. And it doesn't have to be cooperation in between organisms of the same population. It could be cooperation in between organisms of different populations. Like, it could be cooperation in between 2 different species of animals or 2 different species of plants or 2 whatever. Cooperation, lichen. Ever heard of a lichen? Lichen, it's like on the trees. It's an algae and a fungus, and they have this great mutualistic relationship, right? And they basically are super helpful to each other. And we're going to talk about mutualism next, but that's a form of cooperation. Okay. All right. Yeah, we're going to get this done in 10 minutes. Growth has only like 3 things, so we're good there. Okay, so roles and relationships. This is where we do predation. I'm going to put some little symbols here, and we're going to do this really fast because, yeah, these bottom 2 are smaller for a reason. They don't have as much. Cooperation. These are our kind of 3 non-symbiosis roles. Competition. Okay, so predation helps one, right? One group is like, yeah, I ate something. I'm so happy now. The other one is like, dang, I got 8. My life sucks, right? Or actually, my life doesn't exist, right? So that's negative. So positive for one, negative for the other. Cooperation, I just said, positive, positive. Everybody wins. Competition, negative, negative. Nobody wins when competition comes in, okay? Because you are now fighting over the same resources, and that's not good. And then over here, I'm going to do a little symbiosis. This one shows up a lot. I would know my symbiosis examples or my symbiosis types. These are ones you probably remember because they're really, I don't know why. Kids just seem to really stick with these. Mutualism, positive, positive. Both. Now this is, okay, difference here. These do not live together long term, right? This is just temporarily. I went and I ate a gazelle. The lions and the gazelles are not living together in long term. One of them got eaten for a minute and then it's done. Cooperation is just temporary. It's like we're helping each other for a wee bit and then we backing out. Competition is temporary, right? These are long-term relationships that last pretty much a lifetime, okay? Mutualism helps both. These are flowers and bees, butterflies and flowers, anemones and clownfish, all the things that help. Commensalism, arguably, not even sure if it actually exists. Commensalism, I got to stop and spell. And that is positive for one and neutral for the other. Camouflage, shelter in a tree. Camouflage helps the moth, doesn't hurt the tree, doesn't help the tree. Neutral. Except for they'll argue, and I would argue too, anytime you have 2 things living together, they're gonna have some effect. But they're saying the effect is negligible. You're not seeing any effect really. And then of course the other one is parasitism. Parasitism helps one, harms the other. Those are our tapeworms or all that good stuff. Roles and relationships in here. Keystone. So I'm going to put a line there because that we have a kind of a division there. This is still roles and relationships, so I'm not going to put the line all the way to the edge. We're still in the same box. But keystone species, their kind of signature is small in number, large in effect. That's kind of there if you want to define a keystone species. And in that same idea, if you have a trophic cascade, what did I say trophic meant? So if you have a feeding cascade, it means if you take out one part, you can kind of get a domino effect. Okay, or if one part gets healthier, then maybe the whole thing gets healthier, right? It's a cascade. It's one sets off the other. And the last thing I have in here says niche partitioning. And so that's another role relationship. We've talked about this. We talked about niche already. I'll write it up here so you can see. It's supposed to go down there. Niche partitioning simply means stay in your lane, right? Okay, so you have your niche. It's partitioned so that so that we don't see competition in between groups. They partition their niche. So they might be like up in a tree or down below or whatever. But for whatever thing, they have their own little spot. Even if they're similar organisms in a similar area, they found a niche so that they don't compete so much. Okay? Huh? Like a compromise. So they may not get as much resources as they did if they competed the other one completely out. But on the other hand, they might not be able to compete the other one out, and the other one might compete them out. So it's like let's just split the difference. And so they might be better off without the other one there, but they're good enough in their little niche. Okay. All right. And then growth, our biggest ones here are exponential growth and logistic. I'm sure you probably remember these. Exponential growth, you're growing with no limits. So you got food, no predators, you got everything you could possibly need. You cannot keep this up forever. This will end up usually in a crash if it's not limited. Okay, if there's no limits that come into play and start squashing the curve. So this is exponential. Whoop, I'm going to put an arrow that way. And this is logistic. And it has a carrying capacity. Has a carrying cap, which we call K, right? And you have formulas that you plug in numbers and you do the math and blah, blah. I haven't seen any of those formulas on the test the whole time I've ever taught this, so I don't stress about it. Population density is simple math. Number organisms over space. Oh, I should say area. Sorry. Number of organisms over area. And that'll give you your population density. Okay? So your growth of your population depends a lot on your population density, like how it's not just how many are growing, but it's like how dense is the population, right? And then we have limiting factors that come into play with our population density. So often we can just grow and grow and grow until we hit some limiting factors, and a lot of them are associated with, and so I'm going to kind of put a little line towards logistic growth and a little line towards population density, because a lot of our limiting factors are based on population density. Like, I mean, if I don't have too dense of a population, we probably got enough for everybody, right? Not a problem. But once I start hitting a certain density, now we got problems. And guys, disease, big limiting factor based on population density, because you don't spread it around. We saw this so much with COVID, right? You see this where all of a sudden in New York City, they were just dying. I shouldn't even say that because that's kind of literal. They were having way more incidence of disease than that same population was having spread out all over the United States, right? I mean, like Montana had like no problems.
Montana.
Yeah, and then finally, I have a little arrowy growing thing over here. I had to do this because Natalie put her stuff away. So now at the very bottom, I just say, okay, here we go with growth. I mean, this isn't technically growth. So population, oh gosh. If you get populations all together, it makes a community. I needed to make sure you know your little order here. And then ecosystems. And let me just explain briefly what the difference is. Okay, and I have mine down here for those of you who are trying to. Sorry, I got to move my little camera the right way. Population is all the same species. Community is all biotic in an area. So this is all your living things. This would be your plants, your squirrels, your whatever, algae, everything you have in one. It's all living. And ecosystem is biotic and biotic. These are the same biotic factors. Okay, so this is how I explain it to my freshmen, because this is one thing we do more in a freshman year. But basically, you have a population. It's like one of my fingers, right? Here's my population. Okay, so now I have all my populations, right? Population of squirrels, trees, grasses, all the populations. This is a community, right? And then on this hand, I have my abiotic factors. This is oxygen, carbon dioxide, water. What do my abiotic factors do? They support my community. So now I have an ecosystem, okay? And that's kind of when they talk about ecosystem or community, hopefully you'll be able to kind of remember what they are, okay? Any questions on ecology? We are done. We did all the content. I just taught AP Bio in 8 days. Whew, that was a lot of fun.